So, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. Sorry for the slight delay in starting, but we've had one of those last minute technical gremlins jump into the system and actually kidnap one of our speakers, my colleague Lisa Bray. So, unfortunately, she is with us very much in spirit, but not on screen just at the moment. Hopefully, she might be able to join us a bit later. So you're stuck with me, Rachel Osgood, partner in Paris Smith's Family Law Department, and our expert guest speaker today, Bonnie Davis, who is a relationship therapist. But before we get started, I just have to give you some technical information just to make sure that you have the anonymity that we promised you. If I get anything wrong, my support team will jump in and tell me to stop and make it right. But here goes, wish me luck. So at the moment, if you signed in correctly, no one can see you in your picture box at all. So I have no idea who's with us. Bonnie has no idea who's with us. And you have no idea who's with us either. When you joined the webinar, you were invited to fill in your name. And so if you want to remain anonymous, then you should have just filled in anonymous. But if you did fill in your real name and you want your anonymity back, that's fine. You just need to change the name in your picture box. So if you hover your mouse over the picture box, you'll get 3 dots. Click on those dots and it will give you an option to select to change your name. So you can then change your name to anonymous or indeed anything else that takes your fancy today. If you want to ask a question, and there'll be an opportunity to do that later, you can do that anonymously. So in the chat box, select hosts and panelists and direct your question privately to us, me and Bonnie. You can direct your question to everyone if you want to, so long as you've changed your name to anonymous, and then that'll be fine. If you're not bothered about anonymity, none of this matters, and you can ask a question to everyone and everyone will see who you are and that you're in the webinar, and that may not be a problem. Leave that to you. So the session is being recorded, and then when it's finished, we'll be uploading it to our website. So it's a resource then for anyone else who might be interested who couldn't join us today. But none of you will be visible in the recording. If you think that anybody else might be interested in what we're talking about today, then please do feel free to signpost them to our website. And then after the webinar, you'll be sent a feedback form, and it would be really great if you didn't mind filling that in for us and letting us know if there are any other subjects that you'd like us to cover in these webinar sessions. So that's the technical stuff. Hopefully I didn't completely muck that up. I just, again, wanted to thank you for joining us. This is the second in our series of webinars about, we're trying to cover some real life stuff that affects you, our clients, and us as lawyers, because we're the ones trying to help guide you through the minefield of divorce and separation and all the messy stuff that goes with it. So in the first session, we looked at narcissism and the very particular difficulties that go with a divorce or a separation or family breakdown when at least one of the parties is a narcissist. And in this session, we are going to be sharing a little bit of magic with you today. So when we first decided to do this webinar, we thought, well, is it a bit counterintuitive even? We've got a couple of divorce lawyers talking about relationship therapy. Well, our job is to help people separate, not keep them together. In the old days, we used to have to ask a question of our clients who wanted to get divorced, and we used to have to specifically ask them if they'd considered relationship counselling. And we had the option then to give them the names of various organisations. And in those days, it was pretty much only Relate that we could give them as the name to go to. Well, these days, we don't have to ask that question anymore. But I actually do still often ask. It's very much a question still worth asking. And you'll hear from Bonnie later on, actually, with some, what I found them astonishing statistics about the number of people who, even whilst they're going through a divorce, aren't at all sure that's what they want. And even when they get to the end of the divorce, a staggering number of people would still be open to a reconciliation. So when we first decided to do this webinar, I wrote a blog for our website called It's a Kind of Magic. And I talk there about the experience in my own family of relationship therapy. It hadn't been really, as I say, it's just really a tick box exercise for my clients, nothing that I'd really considered in my own personal life. But in my family, there were two people whose relationship had really broken down. They weren't married to each other, they were siblings. So they had a very long relationship, longer probably than most marriages, and probably with a lot more resentments, and they were seething and largely unspoken. It made family gatherings awkward, to say the least. And so eventually, the wider family insisted that these two members of the family get themselves into relationship therapy, which they did. They hated it. They hated each other. They couldn't bear the sight of each other. They didn't want to be there. But neither of them wanted to be the bad guy. Neither of them wanted to be the one to say, well, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm leaving. So they stuck it out. And then something quite magical started to happen. They were each able to speak, and they were each able to listen. But more importantly, even than that, they actually heard each other properly for the first time in years. And with that greater understanding of each other, eventually came forgiveness. And these days, my sister and I are on the best of terms, and our lives are all the richer and happier for it. So since that experience, I'm able to talk with real conviction about relationship therapy and the miracles, and frankly, that it can work. Because if it worked for me and my sister, then believe me, it can work for anyone. And it seems to me also that whereas the unhappiness between my sister and I rippled out across the wider family, now the happiness also ripples out. So it's always worth bearing in mind, not just the effect on ourselves, but on the people that we love as well. I mean, I would say to anyone who's encountering difficulties, maybe thinking, oh, is it worth it? It's all too late. It's just too much. I can't bear it anymore. If there's any chance that you can salvage something from the relationship, maybe rediscover the magic that you had at the beginning, or even if this is good enough for you, if the relationship can be good enough, then maybe that's at least worth a try. I mean, for us as divorce lawyers, it presents us with a little bit of a dilemma, because we're constantly telling our clients, look, once you're on this sort of one-way train to divorce, then really it's better that you cooperate, get it done quickly, because you'll save costs and it will cause a lot less damage in the long term. So that's one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin is, if we can see, and the clients know, and they can feel that they're not ready for this, they're not sure this is what they want, then there's almost no place for them to stop and reflect. They're on that train and they're hurtling towards divorce. So I think for us, being aware of the power of relationship therapy gives us the tools with which to try and create the space for our clients, if that's what they need. So the other sort of magic about relationship therapy, in my view, is that if you've been through the process, you've reflected and come to the conclusion the relationship really is at an end, then relationship therapy can help you end the relationship in a way that honours the way in which it started. You got together, you created a family, you created children maybe because you loved each other and you understood each other and you shared your hopes and dreams. Isn't it better then to find a way to end the relationship with, some of that still intact, at least with friendship and integrity? And also, I should say that if you are able to do that, then you will actually save a fortune in legal fees. So I will hand over now to Bonnie, who's an expert relationship therapist. She is someone who sees the magic every day. And so she's going to give us a tour of her toolbox, I think, tell us a bit of how it works and some real life examples, I hope, as well. So there'll be an opportunity for questions after that. So I look forward to catching up with you after Bonnie's talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That was a lovely introduction. So welcome everyone who's joining us today. I'm passionate about counselling and have found learning about and practicing couples counselling particularly fascinating. I'm really looking forward to sharing some of that with you today. Next slide, please. And the next one. Okay, so today I'm going to cover 4 areas. Why couples therapy, theory and tools, examples and practicalities. I've added a picture of Pandora's box. That's because learning about any counselling theory can be challenging, not because it's complicated or technical, but because it can really touch on personal and delicate topics. So check in with yourself as you listen and take care. It's also a really big topic with one question leading to another question leading to another, as you'll see. Next slide, please. So why might divorce professionals, solicitors, mediators, for example, suggest couples therapy? The reason is something called divorce ambivalence. I'll read these infographics. So these little pictures are taken from a YouTube video by the founders of a therapy that I'm going to go on to in the next slide. And I just captured these 2. I thought they were quite striking. A large study of over 2,000 divorcing parents in Minnesota found that in about 4 out of 10 couples, one or both were not sure a divorce was the right thing to do. And in 10% of couples in the final stages of the divorce process, both say they would be open to reconciliation. So as well as the conflict between the couple, there's commonly conflict within each individual. This is completely normal, but I imagine some divorce professionals pick up on this and perhaps feel pulled in different directions. Yeah, so this is another little kind of snippet from that video. It said, the goal of divorce professionals and the courts is to assist with a fast, efficient, low conflict termination of the marriage. Although trying to be humane, this current approach ignores the divorce ambivalence going on with many couples. Next slide, please. An intervention for this issue of divorce ambivalence is called discernment counselling. It's not couples therapy, but it was researched, devised, and is delivered by couples therapists. And it takes seriously the internal conflicts of both parties and gives them a space, up to 5 joint sessions, to really examine 3 options, which are stay in the relationship as it is, separate or divorce, or commit to really working on their relationship in 6 months of couples therapy. And the founder of this, Bill Doherty, says, the goal of discernment counselling is to help you arrive at greater clarity and confidence in your decision-making about the future of your marriage based on deeper understanding of what's happened to the marriage and each person's contributions to the problems. And I like that statement because it says that the decision-making is based on deeper understanding of what's happened and your contribution to that. And often I might meet people who have been through a divorce or a separation, and they come for counselling, perhaps on their own, because something's missing. They don't understand what happened. They don't understand how it went from where it was to where it ended up. And they don't really get what their contribution was, even though they may have a hunch that in some way they played a part in that. Well, you know, likely 50%. And sometimes it really helps to, even though the marriage is over or the relationship, to figure that out with the person. And at that point, once they've really thought that all through or understood it more deeply with some sort of therapy insight into that, then they feel real closure happens. So, you know, people may well go into a divorce or complete a divorce without that deeper understanding and understanding their contribution to the breakdown. So we can't assume that it's there just because that huge decision has been taken to pursue a divorce. Next slide, please. So have a look at those lyrics. They're from a song. Perhaps you recognise them. Nobody said it was easy. It's such a shame for us to part. Nobody said it was easy. No one ever said it would be this hard. Oh, take me back to the start. So they're beautiful lyrics. They're from Coldplay. You might have figured that out. And now I'm moving on to why couples therapy for individuals. So as well as the divorce professionals, why is it important, or why could it be useful for potential clients or just ordinary people to know what happens in couples therapy? And I think it's because, to start with, there's a question there: do long-term relationships take work? And it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, because as a relationship or couples therapist, my answer is, of course, yes. But there's lots of messages in our culture and in, you know, a romantic view of things in TV, film, books, you know, that kind of maybe create a myth that a good relationship doesn't need to take work. And if I ever hear someone saying that, I either think, well, perhaps they've kind of been influenced by that culture, understandably, or their other half is doing a lot of work, and their other half might be doing a lot of work to make it seem as if it's easy, but actually someone is doing the work there. I think the next two questions are more important and interesting and harder to answer. And they are, how much work should a relationship take? When is it too much work? And then what kind of work? Next slide, please. Leading couples therapists Ellen Bader and Peter Pearson say this: we all know a good marriage takes work, but what does that mean? In our experience, most couples take this to mean that they should simply do more of what they've already been doing. Submissive people think they should submit more. Narcissistic people think they should think more about themselves. For one person, putting effort into the relationship means speaking up when feeling fragile. For another, it means listening to a partner rather than bulldozing. What is easy for one person may be a challenge for the other. So, a question here is, do you know how to work smarter rather than harder in your primary relationships? And when I say work smarter, I mean, are you able to show up bravely, powerfully, vulnerably, kindly, compassionately, openly, or authentically? These are some of the personal qualities that are needed in a good quality long-term relationship. Does anyone start off their adult life with them? Perhaps that is the purpose of long-term relationship. Perhaps that is the gift of them. Next slide, please. So most leading couples therapists say, in different ways, and from different theoretical angles, but a similar message, that you should expect to hit bumps in your relationship. That's fundamentally it's just a logical reality that if two people are different, that there will be, and they're going to live together, that there's some way they're going to have to figure out how to do that. It won't be a natural fulfillment of an infantile fantasy of compatibility, or yeah. So expect to hit these bumps and use them to grow beyond your immature narcissism or your low self-esteem. In a sense, the bumps are inevitable, part of full adult development. Okay, so next slide, please. So let's look behind the scenes at some of the theory that informs what happens in couples therapy. This is Sigmund Freud. You might recognize him. He was one of the earliest thinkers to develop the psychological idea of transference, and the concept has been a staple of therapeutic thinking ever since. Here's the idea in a nutshell. I'll take a drink before I do this. Human beings are by far the most impressive species when it comes to their capacity for learning, language, culture, and civilization. Compared to other animals, they're also dependent for a long time after birth. This is because they have very large brains and they need to be born before their brains are fully complete. So they have a massive capacity to be programmed with information about how to survive in whatever context they find themselves born into. Another way to say it is that a huge amount of nurture influences the outcome of any particular human being. The same baby born into a different historical, political, economical, social, national, religious, family context will develop into a very different person. Unlike, say, a giraffe born in a different time and place. Much of a giraffe's behavior would stay the same, and they're more vulnerable as a result. They wouldn't be able to figure out how to build an igloo if they were born somewhere very cold. And so it's not to deny that biology plays a part in what it means to be human, but just to say that nurture and environment are particularly influential on personality and behavioral outcomes in humans. So this has been an evolutionary advantage. Because of their big brains, humans have great potential to survive and master their environment. They also have great potential for harm, but you could say that's an unfortunate but inevitable part of having big brains. Okay, so human beings are born and they have these highly plastic brains, and they absorb a huge amount of information, especially in the early years. One of their most important early drives is to stay close to their parent because their life depends on that. Infants and young children are hardwired to observe their primary caregiver closely so that they can figure out how to keep that person close. This is where the idea of transference comes in. The child forms an impression of their worthiness and lovability based on how they've been treated in their formative years. This turns into something known as their internal working model of relationships, and they carry this internal model into later life. When we encounter new people, we don't have time to learn every single thing about them. There's infinite information that we're presented with in meeting a new person. So we go back to these unconscious assumptions about people based on what we've absorbed from the way we were related to in our early years. This brings us to attachment. Next slide, please. So I'm really aware this is quite a whistle-stop tour of some massive ideas, and it's, skimming. There's a lot deeper that you could go, but I'll carry on. So attachment is a sort of example of transference. And depending on your overall experience in your childhood, attachment theory claims that you form an attachment style as an adult. The first two on that little table you can see are known as insecure styles, while the final style is secure. Very briefly, the parent of the avoidant person was less attuned and receptive to the child's feelings and needs, and the child learnt to relate to their own emotions with dismissal or avoidance. Expressing too much emotion seemed to push the parent away, so this became dangerous and, in a sense, life-threatening. This could manifest in many types of, many ways. For example, addiction, which functions to numb emotion, and there are many types of addiction, or a person perhaps pretends they're fine, but isn't really, and then it leaks out in toxic ways. An anxiously attached person learnt to work really hard to be pleasing to their caregiver. They didn't get attention unless they performed, or perhaps they learnt to look after their parent, to keep the parent interested and willing to and capable of engaging with their child. In doing so, they weren't free to develop naturally, to be their fuller self, and they lived with a threat that if they didn't adapt significantly, they would be abandoned. So finally, to develop a secure attachment, the caregiver would have been available, interested, attuned, responsive, would have delighted in their child, but also wouldn't have depended on the child for their fulfillment in life, or their pleasure, or their or be dependent on the child. It's not an absolute. Good enough is the aim. Overachieving as a parent also has issues. So it can sound like a pretty high bar to raise a securely attached child, but in practice, it's a bit more realistic than it might sound. So it can be kind of overwhelming to learn about transference and attachment, or to encounter those concepts for the first time, or even, you know, for another time. A really important belief in the therapy world is that attachment styles can change over the life course, which perhaps is reassuring when you see the starkness of how these styles are described. We retain neuroplasticity, or the potential to learn and grow, for our entire lives. So people can work towards being securely attached. And there are 3 ways, according to someone called David Wallin, who wrote a book called Attachment in Psychotherapy, which is really good. 3 ways, the key ways. Firstly, not surprising perhaps, long-term therapy, in which the therapist functions as a secure base through attuned responding to the feelings of the client, a bit like a parent figure, although of course the relationship is different. Meditation can be used where the person functions as their own secure base. But more commonly and more accessible is a positive long-term romantic partnership, where each person learns through trial and error and getting those bumps on the road and being confronted by the challenge of maintaining a relationship with someone different. And they both learn to relate to the other in maybe an increasingly secure style. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I am going to skip this slide because I'm going to press on. Thank you. All right. So in couples therapy, I'm aiming for each person to understand how they relate in a less than secure style, how this causes problems, and I'm aiming to give them skills for relating more securely. I do that by modeling what secure relating is, and sometimes forcefully creating a space in which they can experiment safely with relating differently. So, for example, that might be holding a partner back if they're leaping in to close someone down or criticize or defend themselves. I'm there to manage that interaction. So here are 3 tools that I use with almost every couple to achieve this. So nonviolent communication is a great help, and it sort of sprinkles through the sessions that I have, rather than being a standalone, this is what it is. And the book's there that it's based on. And in a nutshell, it is replacing disconnecting language with connecting language. So it's not that you're not saying things, but you are aware of, when you do try and communicate, if you're doing that in a way that is critical, judgmental, labeling, using shoulds, saying always, never, blaming, making a demand, talking about one person being right, the other wrong, giving an opinion. And when you're trying to connect with someone, get your needs met, that tends to have the opposite effect. It tends to push them away. It tends to lead to disconnection. So how do you connect with someone? How do you say the same material, but in a way that they can hear and in a way that can get you what you're looking for? So in nonviolent communication, rather than direct sort of criticizing, judging, blaming the other person or yourself, you know, even being self-critical would be a sort of violent communication style. You go for clear observations, expressing feelings, expressing needs, and making requests. And there's a huge amount to each of those 4 points, but really it always comes down to those 4 elements. And every time a couple, someone might use a piece of language that is a disconnecting piece of communication, I can translate what they're saying, or I aim to translate it into something that is an observation, a feeling, a need, or a request. And it's surprising. I think many people find it surprising at how possible it is to translate what they're saying into that way of talking. One sheet that's I find it nice because it's so simple, is called 4 Ways to Take It, and I popped it on the slide. And it's a little like a worksheet, and you can take something, what you heard the other person say or saw them do. So let's say you saw some shoes in disarray in the hall, on the hall floor. And then it gives you 4 ways to take it. The first 2 are just to sort of vent, get it out, see what you're doing. And then the second, the third and fourth are to practice at sort of expressing the same thing, but in a more constructive way. So judge and blame the other person. They're messy, they shouldn't do that, they always leave their shoes there. You know, they're very untidy, they're disrespectful, unkind, inconsiderate, and lazy. It doesn't tend to get a good response. But you could judge and blame yourself equally, like, oh, I'm a nag, I'm too concerned about tidiness, or I'm a bit of a neat freak, or I've got OCD, or I'm unreasonable, or I'm acting like their mother, or you can also judge and blame yourself. So taking those out, wonder what I'm feeling and needing. I'm feeling disappointed, irritated, upset, uncomfortable, because I'm needing, not because they caused me by putting the shoes there, or not putting the shoes away, but because I'm needing calm, kind of space, some consideration. And what are they feeling needing? Perhaps they're feeling tired, perhaps they're feeling relaxed, perhaps they're needing to concentrate on something that's more important to them, to think about housework at a different point of the day. And then once you've got your feelings and needs, you can then look at, okay, what are strategies for both people to get their needs met, or if not fully met, to go further towards getting met than they are at the moment. Excuse me. So that's fairly straightforward example, but there are multiple ways that can be applied. Next slide, please. So I really like this tool. It's called the Dance of Disconnection. It comes from a thinker called Sue Johnson, who's pretty famous English couples therapist, theorist and she writes a lot about attachment. So I might have a couple, and they talk about that their communication is really bad, or that one person, maybe the complaint is that he doesn't care about me, he's not thoughtful, I don't feel he loves me anymore, he seems disinterested. And he might say, she's moody all the time, she's doesn't talk about what's upsetting her, she demands too much of me. So this might be the kind of presenting issue. And then I might ask for an example. Let's look at a little example, or a concrete example, and that represents the dynamic, what goes wrong when you're trying to connect with each other, or when you're feeling very disconnected. And then we go very slowly through it and really kind of pull it apart with these 3 elements. So what was each person's trigger? What was their feeling? And what was their behavior? So a little kind of example that I'm going to give is trigger might be the female partner's birthday is forgotten. There's no present. There's just a last minute dash to the garage to get a card, and she's very upset about it, and she goes into a huff, and there's a bad atmosphere on her birthday, and she is very passive aggressive, or closed down and withdrawn. And then he feels irritated by that, feels that he can't get anything right, and that he's being unfairly punished. So we look at, okay, what was her trigger? Her partner's got her a disappointing birthday present. what are her feelings? Upset, unappreciated, reminds her of parents who are always too busy socializing, just used her to brag about her achievements to their friends. Irritated. So I've thrown in something there which goes back to childhood, and that might come up when I say, well, how are you feeling? And ask the person to open up more about it. And she might say upset, unappreciated, irritated. And I might say, well, what does that remind you of? Or is that familiar? And in a moment, she might make a connection and say, well, yeah, it reminds me of when I was younger, and this is how I used to be treated. And it really hurts. And so there's some depth to this story that seems it's just about this present day event, but actually she's bringing a lot to it, and it affects her quite deeply. So then we look at his trigger, and it might be that he remembered that there was a drama on her last birthday about the present, and he might be feeling his trigger might be the memory of the drama. His feeling might be stress, pressure, anxiety, that it's all going to go wrong and it's going to be his fault and she's going to have a go at him and he can't get it right and he doesn't know what to get. And he might say his behavior might be to say, to defend himself. I don't know, I'm no good at getting presents. Why do you put this pressure on me? Or to put off doing it, to not want to take a risk, or to just not think about it for a bit and then forget, or to go for an easy option of giving some money or asking her. And that might lead, again, his behavior might become her trigger, which is that again, that her birthday isn't kind of prioritized. So I feel like it's hard to do this kind of without. Yeah, so you've got a trigger, a feeling, and a behavior basically for each person. And the point is that we all have triggers. There's going to be difference between us. Some people there's going to be a way in which we feel let down, or something goes wrong, or someone gets stressed. There's a lot of feelings that arise. They're really natural. They're expected. They are part of being human. And then there's the behaviors, and the behaviors are something we've got a bit more choice over. Just because a trigger happens doesn't automatically mean that a certain behavior needs to happen. So, for example, what would her options be apart from going into a huff, creating this negative atmosphere, putting him down, complaining to him? Well, we would sort of explore that together, and we might come up with ideas. And there are like a wide range of alternative ways that she might be able to get her needs met, and so not feel as upset, unappreciated, sad, irritated. You might be able to imagine some of those, but between us, we'd figure it out. So she would come up with some ideas. He might make some suggestions about what he could offer, and then I would input as well. All right, so the final tool that I use, next slide, please, is called the Imago 8-Step Dialogue, and that was devised by Harville Hendrix and Helen LaKelly Hunt in this book. I don't know how easy it is to see there. And this is to go deeper where there is a kind of emotional gridlock between a couple. So the example that I had in mind for this, although I probably don't have time to fully go into it in depth, is one where I had a couple who were high achievers and working in sort of big tech companies, and they'd met at university, and they'd been together through their 20s. They were married. They were now in the early 30s, and he was taking a career break to look at his options because he wasn't fulfilled in his software engineering role, and he wanted to shift and explore and see what would really make work life fulfilling for him. And so they had this big difficulty around their finances and their future. She'd had one idea about the way things were going to develop. They were both working very hard. She wanted to create a really secure life for them both. And he had an idea that actually they didn't need as much as that they could perhaps be freer to explore different avenues, or he could at least. And so that led to quite a conflict between them. So we used an Imago 8-step dialogue, and we went through it, and it goes like this. You start with the sender saying, "Are you available for dialogue?" Really important, because often people have rows in the car, and if they'd have asked, "Is this a good time for us to talk about something heavy?" the other person could have said, "Not really, I can't really concentrate. How about we talk about it and schedule a time?" That strategy has helped in a lot of situations. I've had feedback on that. So they ask that. If they're in the therapy room, then they are available for dialogue usually. Then the speaker, the sender, expresses their observation, feelings and needs in short phrases. The receiver, that's the listener, says, "What I heard you say was, did I get that? Is there more?" So if they did get it right, the speaker will say, "Yes, you got that right, and there is more." And the beauty of this dialogue is that it prevents a response to something that's incomplete. And often there's more, like we saw in the present example. So here there was more, because the woman in this example, she had quite a insecure economic background, and it was very important to her to offer her children more security and stability in the future. They didn't have children, but that she was hoping to have that. And there was more under that layer, because she was worried that he was using her to finance his life at that point, and that once he'd done that, he'd experimented, explored, he would maybe leave her, like he'd left his job, and want to meet different women. And then beneath that, again, he reflected that back, but there was more. There was more about trying to recall this. Anyway, there was layer upon layer of emotion that was behind it. So then the listener summarizes what they've heard to demonstrate they've really heard and taken it in and understood. Then they provide a validation, which is something along the lines of, I may not agree with the way you see things. However, I really get that it makes sense that you feel that way because you've had these experiences, this perspective, this background. Then they give empathy, and they say something like, "I wonder if you're also feeling," and name a feeling that the person hasn't described. Then they thank each other. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for speaking." And they're both really hard roles. The listeners often, although they're not the one that's being vulnerable and brave in speaking their truth and connecting with their difficult emotions, listening can be so hard without desperately wanting to rush in and fix or defend themselves. So many people fail to get to step 7 actually, and just can't take it, can't hear that amount. And that's part of my role, is to support them to contain themselves until it's their turn. And then we might reverse, and that process might take 30 to 40 minutes. So the reverse might happen the next week. So there's a kind of discipline in being able to know it's not finished, but that really helpful work is being done. And I've had people say, even though we had to pause and wait till the following week, it was actually quicker than descending into a sort of kind of 3-day standoff, which wastes a lot of time, uses so much energy. This seems very sort of micro steps to go through, but it's because it goes deeper, it's much more effective, and it is time saving. And yeah, so that's a fabulous thing that I use, and then I would tell you more about what happened on his side and then where they went with that, but I'll have to save that because of time. So next slide, please. So sometimes I give home learning, or otherwise known as homework in the old days, and yeah, that's I'm not quite, yeah, that's the bullet points have gone a bit rearranged, but there's some examples of things that people might do for homework, like self-care, checking in with themselves so they know how they're feeling, so they can express that rather than going straight to the behaviours they're used to using to defend themselves or to keep themselves safe. Okay, next slide. I feel like there's not time for this, but there might be things that you have questions about. So examples I might have given would be around affairs. Esther Perel writes brilliantly about them in her book State of Affairs, and there's a specific protocol for addressing affairs. The good news is that often people do recover, relationships do recover from affairs, and I've been surprised by that. It's changed my view from working in that field. Differences in levels of sexual desire are addressed by a lot of couples theorists. Martha Kalpi at the Institute for Relational Intimacy. The researchers into magnificent sex. It's quite a recent book, very interesting. And David Schnartz writes prolifically about different levels of desire. It's a very, very common reason for relationship breakdown. Neurodivergence, what happens when one partner has ADHD? How do couples cope with that? They can cope with it, and the ADHD effect on marriage is very good. Recognizing what's going on is often, one of the most important factors there. Life transitions, starting a family or entering retirement, people can find massive differences between themselves emerging at those points. And there might be deal breakers. Maybe people really can't live in the same continent for important personal reasons. Maybe one of them sexually identifies as polyamorous and the other one as monogamous, and that becomes a deal breaker. And that's something that they can use couples counselling to figure out or work out. Okay, next slide. So the practicalities of couples therapy, again, this is the final slide and I'll whiz through it. First, we have to find one. Some people struggle to do that. There are directories. VACP is a great one. I do a 15 minutes phone call for free, and yeah, that can be a conference call with 2 people. I send a questionnaire to prepare and screen for danger, such as domestic abuse or mental health issues or addiction, which might just make it ineffective to have couples counselling at that stage. And then there's an initial session, and what happens in that is that I do a little ice-breaking exercise to warm people up, to set an agenda, and then explain that this is different to one-to-one counselling. It's more directed by me, and there's more kind of tools that I use actively to kind of contain what's going on, because you can't really just let 2 people that are in conflict free flow. It doesn't really work. They just repeat the same patterns that are going on outside, so it's not effective. And then number of sessions and frequency vary a lot, so that just gets looked at. Okay, so that's the end. We have, I suppose, 8 minutes for questions.
Yeah, sorry, Bonnie, I was just turning my camera and sound back on then. Yeah, so a few questions have popped up, and as Bonnie says, we've got a few minutes, so if anybody wants to quickly fire up a question, then do so in the chat box now. But yes, I took on board your, I think, the Imago slide with the sort of complex dance of how to communicate, to get what you want, to express your needs, and all the rest of it. And it reminded me of almost my first comment to my husband this morning when I walked into our home office and said, "What the hell's this mess?" Didn't go down well. Must try harder. But yes, so sorry, looking at the questions, and this goes to something you've literally just touched on. This person says that her husband had an affair 2 years ago, and she finds it difficult to get past that and to trust him again. And she asks, is it possible to get past this? Yeah, I just wonder, you mentioned that book, and
Yep.
it seems almost like an impossible thing to get through, but are couples able to get past it?
Yes, that's the answer. And I would really recommend reading that book. It's packed with insight into why affairs happen, why they happen to people in happy marriages or relationships, and what your options are when that happens. The protocol in couples therapy is that it starts with the kind of injured, betrayed party being heard. And that's really important, that they are centered and they have as long and as many sessions as they need to express their pain. And the pain is very, very deep. But nothing can happen, no progress is made until they actually feel really heard and received by the person that betrayed them. And the obstacle there is that it's just so hard to listen to that. It's so hard. The shame that the betraying party might feel is kind of almost like too heavy a burden for them to carry. So their job is to move past that shame and to move into guilt, which is it's just different, because shame is about, I'm so awful. It's still focused all about you. Whereas what the betrayed party really needs is for them to focus on the betrayed person. And to do that, guilt is different to shame, because it's about what you've done wrong, how you're going to repair it, and the impact on the other people, as opposed to just being self-involved about how awful and disgusted and self-loathing you might feel. So that's a big job, the first one. And then after that, there is inevitably the question of, why did the affair happen? And again, people don't always have a deep understanding of that. They have maybe a superficial level understanding, but they're supported to go deeper, to really kind of understand why that happened. And sometimes there are kind of myths that people have. Maybe they're naive about, once you're in a relationship, you're not going to be attracted to other people. If you're attracted to another person, you can't control it. And lots of that would be challenged by me or the therapist, and there would be more options given. A really cool quote for me is something like, I'm trying to think who said it. Terry Real. He's a cool dude. He says it. He's called Terry Real, and he's very real the way that he writes. But he said, marriage is unnatural. Open marriages hardly work. Choose your poison. So there's a lowering of expectation about how easy this is going to be and how many mistakes are going to get made. And then once that's happened, there's sort of understanding, then there's the affair proofing, and then there's the real exploration of, how do you affair proof a relationship? And maybe it's not possible to have, maybe it's again another illusion that a relationship can be, completely safe and completely risk-free, that there's a living with uncertainty and a capacity and tolerance of that's required to go forward. So it's long work, it's tricky work, but people come and often are desperate to do it, hugely well motivated, and do achieve it.
Well, that's positive news for the people that have to go through that trauma. And of course, we do see many of those people, sadly.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. All right, yeah, now here's one that actually rings a little bell with me. This person says, and this again goes to communication actually, they say that whenever they ask their husband to do anything, he accuses her of treating him like a child. And it always leads to an argument, apparently.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So
Probably an everyday kind of thing, isn't it? You know, sees the
mhm,
micro aggressions and the micro pains and hurts that arise
yeah,
from, you know, will you just do it properly,
yeah, yeah,
leading to, you know, eventually a breakdown in communication.
yeah. So this is a very sort of strong part of the effect of ADHD on a marriage. That often there's a parent-child dynamic emerges, but it doesn't have to just be where there's neurodivergence. It's just a difference in levels of tolerance for visual disarray, for example, or like neat and messy kind of personalities. So yeah, it's damaging. It's damaging to slide into a parent-child dynamic in a marriage. It very much desexualizes it and is kind of painful for both people. So in that, I probably would take a specific or representative example and go very slowly, fine-tooth comb, like you say, on the micro level, the trigger, the feelings, and the behaviors. And the feelings might be, uh, you know, shame or irritation. And if I say, you know, does that remind you of anything? It might be something like, yeah, you know, my dad used to speak to me and boss me around, and I don't like it. I feel rebellious about that. And then the behavior might be, well, I don't do it. I kind of have a tantrum, which is classic child behavior. So, what are other alternatives? Is it to say, yeah, I'm not feeling comfortable about the way we're talking about this. Can we sit down and, you know, have a adult to adult conversation about how we're going to manage the domestic load in the house? And, you know, what's it like for you being the one that has to uh, sort of ask me and feels sucked into that script of being a parent? I've got an example at the moment of a couple who, and I did ask them if I could share this. Um, he's the sort of the toddler. He's been told off for leaving the house in the state, and now they have, because his brain doesn't work in a way that has like executive function and plans ahead and takes responsibility for that area, and he doesn't care about it. It's not interesting to him. It just goes out the window. He wants to please her. He wants to be kind, but he says sorry and then never does anything about it. So they've implemented two jars, and one of those jars has little sticks in it with tasks written on them, and they pick one a day, and they're 15-minute tasks. And he also copes better with you know, if something's just for 15 minutes, he can keep his concentration. After that, it's too overwhelming, you know, just not going to bother because it's just too much. Where do I start? But a 15 minutes doesn't have to be finished, just have to start tidying that space. And when he gets into it, he'll finish it, you know, because you do. It's hard. The hardest bit is starting. Um, it's such a sort of basic intervention or behavior change, but it shows her that he does care. He does genuinely want to be an equal in the partnership. That he does want to be sort of taken seriously, and that she can calm down and doesn't have to get louder and louder. Because the more she does that, the more he's withdrawing, and then there's that. The more she does, the more he does this, and a kind of pursuer withdrawer dynamic. So
Yeah,
yeah, adult to adult is the aim.
just the key.
Mm.
Thank you. I think that probably brings us to the end of our time now. So thank you very much, Bonnie, and thank you everyone for joining us and for submitting your questions. Sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them, but it just seems to me, and I tell this to my clients all the time, it all comes down to communication. And what you deal in really is communication, isn't it? And to give them the
Yeah,
tools with which to better communicate with each other and to really hear and understand each other and to hopefully bring back the magic of their relationship. Um, and for everyone who's listening who hopes to bring back that magic, I wish you all the very best. And as I said at the start, there's a feedback form that will come out to you, and we would love to cover subjects that you want to cover in these sessions. So just let us know what you think would be really helpful if you're going through a divorce or you're thinking about going through a separation, or maybe you've already done that and you'd like to know more about the one thing you'd wished you'd known at the time. So thanks very much and see you soon.